Jake was used to the rough life of a cargo pilot. He didn't care much for fancy space stations or glittering cities. He liked the quiet, dusty planets that most people overlooked. Today was no different. He was on Xerax 9, a small colony on the edge of human-controlled space. The colony was nothing special, just a place where people worked in mines, traded goods, and tried to stay out of trouble. Jake had just landed his ship, the Iron Wolf, at a docking bay and was making his way to the local cantina for a drink when he noticed something strange. A woman was standing outside the cantina, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to protect herself from an invisible force. She was alien, her skin a soft blue hue, her long hair braided with small silver beads that shimmered in the dim light. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught Jake's attention. It was the desperate look in her eyes. Jake took another step toward the entrance, but the woman's eyes locked on him. She moved quickly, her feet almost silent on the gravel beneath her. Before he could react, she was standing right in front of him, blocking his path. "Please," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "you have to help me." Jake was taken aback. Normally, when strangers approached him, they wanted something. Money, food, maybe a ride. But the way she looked at him was different. It wasn't like the usual beggars he encountered on these backwater planets. She seemed afraid. He crossed his arms and tilted his head. "Help you? With what exactly?" Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept eye contact. "Marry me." Jake blinked, thinking he had misheard her. "What?" "I'm begging you," she said, her voice urgent now. "Marry me. I don't have much time." Jake took a step back, shaking his head. "Look, lady, you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a cargo pilot. I don't do marriage, especially not with, well, aliens." He waved his hand vaguely in the air, feeling uncomfortable. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. The desperation in her eyes, though, didn't fade. "I don't have any other choice," she said, lowering her voice. "Please, you don't understand. I need to marry you. It's the only way I can survive." Jake was still confused, but there was something about her story that pulled at him. He wasn't exactly a kind-hearted guy, but he wasn't cold enough to ignore someone in real danger. "Why? What's going on?" The woman glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might be listening. "My name is Lissa," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I am from the planet Saphira. My people, we are a peaceful species, but we have strict customs. If a female does not have a husband by the time she is of age, she is considered a burden, an outcast. They kill us if we do not find a mate." Jake frowned, trying to process what she was saying. "Wait, you're saying your people kill women who don't get married?" Lissa nodded. "Yes, it's the law. But there is a loophole. If I marry a human, the law doesn't apply. I would be protected." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. It sounded insane. "So you want me to marry you just so you can escape some weird law on your planet?" "I know it sounds strange," Lissa said quickly, "but it's the only way. I've already run away from home, but I've been hunted ever since. The man they want me to marry, he is dangerous. I can't go back to him. Please, you're my only hope." Jake stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He didn't even know how he'd gotten into this situation. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. The idea of marrying an alien woman to save her life was beyond anything he had ever imagined. But there was something in her eyes, something genuine, that made him pause. "I don't know," Jake muttered, scratching the back of his neck. "I mean, I'm just a pilot. I don't get involved in whatever this is. I've got enough problems of my own." Lissa's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer to him. "Please, I'm begging you. Without your help, I will die." Jake stared at her for a long moment. The look in her eyes was too real to ignore. He sighed and rubbed his face. He wasn't a hero. Hell, he wasn't even a nice guy. but he couldn't stand by while someone was in danger. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "I'll help you. But this doesn't mean I'm agreeing to marry you. I'll listen to your story, but no promises." Lissa's face lit up with relief, though she didn't smile. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Jake looked around the dusty street, still processing everything. The woman's situation didn't make sense, but there was no denying that she was desperate. And for some strange reason, he found himself willing to help her, even if he didn't understand why. "Well, we can talk about it," Jake said, stepping around her and heading toward the cantina. "But you've got to buy me a drink first. I'm not doing this on an empty stomach." Lissa hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But she nodded and followed him inside. The cantina was dimly lit, with a few locals sitting around tables and muttering in various languages. The smell of fried food and stale beer filled the air. Jake walked up to the counter and ordered his usual, a glass of something strong. Lissa hesitated at his side, looking around at the unfamiliar place. "Relax," Jake said, handing her a drink. "I'm not going to bite." She took the drink, her fingers delicate around the glass, and sipped it cautiously. Her gaze never left Jake, as if she were watching for any sign of danger. They sat at a table in the corner, and Jake leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "All right, let's hear this story of yours. Why would your people want to kill you if you don't marry?" Lissa took a deep breath and began to explain. She told Jake how her species, the Zephyrins, were known for their peaceful nature and advanced knowledge. But with their advanced society came strict traditions. Women who did not marry by a certain age were considered liabilities. The laws were unyielding, and the penalties were severe. Jake listened carefully, more curious than ever. Lissa's story was strange, but there was no doubt in his mind that she was telling the truth. There was too much fear in her eyes for it to be a scam. She continued, "I was promised to a man, a wealthy merchant. He is powerful and ruthless. He has many enemies, and I am just another pawn in his game. He wants to marry me to gain political power, but I cannot live with him. He's cruel, and he will control me until I am nothing but his property. I ran away, and now he is hunting me." Jake's frown deepened. "So you're telling me this guy is after you, and you think marrying me will protect you?" Lissa nodded. "Yes, as long as I am married to a human. The law will not touch me." Jake rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "All right, let's say I believe you. What happens next?" Lissa gave him a hopeful glance. "If we marry, I will be safe, but it must be done quickly, before the merchant catches up with me." Jake took a long drink from his glass, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. He didn't know why, but he felt responsible for this woman now. He couldn't just turn her away, not after everything she told him. "Fine," Jake said, finally making up his mind. "I'll help you, but you're going to have to tell me more about this merchant. Why's he so dangerous?" Lissa's eyes darkened. "He will stop at nothing to get what he wants. And now that he knows I've run away, he won't rest until I'm back in his control." Jake nodded. "All right, we'll figure this out." Lissa gave him a small, grateful smile. For the first time since they'd met, there was a glimmer of hope in her expression. Jake didn't know what he had just signed up for, but one thing was certain. He wasn't getting out of this anytime soon. Jake sat back in his chair at the cantina, staring at the half-empty glass in front of him. He hadn't planned for any of this. Just a simple pit stop on a routine cargo run. But now, everything had changed. He couldn't stop thinking about Lissa, the alien woman who'd practically begged him to marry her. It was the kind of thing that only happened in bad sci-fi movies. Yet here he was, sitting across from a woman who seemed to believe it with all her heart. Her story still felt strange to him, like a puzzle missing too many pieces. He had agreed to help her, but there was so much more he didn't understand. Why would a powerful alien merchant be chasing her? Why would she need to marry someone like him, a simple, rough-around-the-edges pilot, to escape her people's laws? The whole situation was impossible, yet somehow here they were. Lissa was sitting across from him, her blue skin glowing softly under the cantina's dim lights. She looked nervous, her fingers tracing patterns on the edge of her glass, her eyes occasionally darting toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in and drag her away. Jake couldn't blame her. From the way she spoke, it sounded like her life was on the line. He wasn't about to make a promise to a stranger, but he couldn't ignore the fear in her eyes. So, Jake said, leaning forward, trying to break the silence, "I've heard your story, but I still don't get it. Why me? Why marry a human? What makes that so special?" Lissa sighed, lowering her eyes for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "You don't understand. On my planet, the Zephyrins, we value unity and order above everything. Our laws are strict. But humans, you're different. You don't live by the same rules. You value freedom, independence, and individuality. If I marry a human, it doesn't matter what my people think. I'll be safe." Jake blinked, trying to wrap his head around it. "So, because humans aren't bound by your laws, if I marry you, your people can't touch you." Lissa nodded, her eyes full of quiet hope. "Exactly. That's why you're my only choice. The merchant who's chasing me, he can't do anything if I'm married to a human." Jake rubbed his chin, thinking. This was crazy. A human marriage to protect an alien woman from her planet's laws. It was something out of a space opera. But in the end, the fact remained. Lissa had nowhere else to turn, and though Jake didn't know why, a part of him didn't want to let her face whatever was coming along. "So what's the catch?" Jake asked. "You want me to marry you, but what happens after that? I don't know anything about your people or their laws. What happens to me? What do I get out of this?" Lissa looked uncomfortable. She hesitated before speaking, clearly reluctant to answer. "The marriage, it won't be easy for you. I don't expect it to be. You'll have to stay with me. You'll have to protect me from the merchant and his men. And if he finds us..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The fear was back in her eyes. Jake thought for a moment. "So you're asking me to put my life on the line for some stranger? That's a big ask, Lissa. What if I don't want to get tangled up in this mess?" Lissa met his gaze, her voice soft but determined. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I already run from everything I've ever known. If I don't get your help, I'll be hunted for the rest of my life. The merchant will stop at nothing to find me. I can't fight him alone. And if I go back, I'll be nothing but a piece of property. I don't want that. I want to live. I want to have a future." Jake paused. The words hit harder than he expected. He wasn't used to being anyone's hero, but the pain in her voice was impossible to ignore. Maybe he didn't understand her planet or her laws, but he knew what it felt like to be desperate, to feel like you had no options left. "All right," Jake said finally, exhaling deeply. "I'll do it. I'll marry you. But just so we're clear, I'm not doing this out of some noble sense of duty. I'm doing it because you need help, and I don't like seeing people get dragged down." Lissa's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know what to say. You don't realize how much this means to me." Jake shrugged. "I guess you'll have to figure that out later. But if we're going to do this, I need to know everything. Who's this merchant? What's his deal? And why is he so eager to hunt you down?" Lissa nodded, and after a moment's hesitation, she began to explain. "The merchant's name is Derek Velos. He's a powerful man, rich and well-connected. He controls much of the trade on my planet. He doesn't care about anything except profit. And when my family arranged the marriage, he saw it as an opportunity to gain even more power." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't want to marry him. I didn't want to be used like that. So I ran away. But he's not the kind of man who gives up easily. He's ruthless, and he'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants. That includes sending bounty hunters after me." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The way Lissa spoke about Derek, it was clear she was terrified of him. The thought of a ruthless merchant chasing after a woman who had already escaped his clutches made Jake uneasy. What happens if I don't marry you? What does Derek do then? Jake asked. If I'm not married by the time he finds me, he'll send me back to Zephyra. And if I resist, he'll have me arrested. There's no escaping it. I'll be forced to marry him, and then I'll be under his control forever. I can't let that happen. The engines roared to life, and Jake guided the Iron Wolf into the sky. The spaceport faded quickly into the distance, and the planet itself shrank beneath them. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but he didn't dare look back. He had to focus on the mission at hand, getting away from Xerax-9 without anyone noticing. They jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines as the ship accelerated faster than the speed of light. For a moment, it felt like they were safe, but Jake knew better. The chase was just beginning. The first few hours were quiet. They traveled through the cold emptiness of space, trying to put as much distance between themselves and Xerax-9 as possible. But Jake knew they couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, Derek would find them. It was only a matter of time. Jake set the autopilot and made his way to the small galley at the back of the ship. He grabbed some food and sat down at the table. Lissa joined him shortly after, her face still tense. I'm sorry you're caught up in all this, Jake said, breaking the silence. I didn't expect it to get this crazy. Lissa shook her head. It's not your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. I'm the one who brought you into it. Jake shrugged. Doesn't matter. You needed help, and I gave it. I'm not backing out now. There was a long pause as they ate in silence. Neither of them was particularly hungry, but the food helped pass the time. We should make for a place called Draconis Station, Jake said after a while. It's a neutral zone. No one really has control over it. If we can make it there, we can figure out our next move. Lissa looked up at him. Is it safe? Jake leaned back in his chair. As safe as anything gets in space. It's a place for smugglers, traders, and people who want to disappear. If we can't lose Derek, we might be able to hide there until things calm down. Do you think we can really outrun him? Lissa asked, her voice laced with doubt. Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. We'll have to. We don't have much choice. Hours passed. The ship hummed along through the dark stretches of space, but Jake couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being followed. He kept his eyes on the scanners, watching for any signs of pursuit. So far, nothing. But that didn't mean they were safe. Derek was smart, and he had resources. Jake knew they had to stay ahead of him if they wanted to survive. Then, a warning light on the control panel blinked on. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Shit, he muttered under his breath, turning his attention to the readout. We've got company. Lissa stood up, looking alarmed. What does that mean? It means we're not alone out here anymore, Jake said, punching a few buttons to get a clearer read on the incoming ships. Someone's tailing us. Lissa's eyes widened. It's him, isn't it? Jake didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. He could already see what was coming. 2 ships had appeared on the scanners, and they were closing in fast. He gritted his teeth and slammed his fist against the console. Damn it. It's him. The feeling of dread washed over him like a cold wave. They hadn't been able to get far enough ahead. Derek's men had caught up to them. We need to lose them, Jake said, his voice low and steady, though his mind raced. Hold on tight. He grabbed the controls and veered hard to the left, sending the ship into a sudden roll. Lissa grabbed onto the seat, her knuckles white, as the ship shook from the sharp maneuver. Jake threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers, trying to shake off the 2 ships tailing them. He could see them on his radar, closing in with every second. The Iron Wolf was fast, but the 2 ships following them weren't slow either. They were determined, and that meant trouble. Lissa gripped the seat even harder, her face pale. What do we do now? Can we outrun them? Jake didn't answer right away. He was too busy calculating their next move. The only chance they had was to reach Draconis Station, but there was no way they'd get there with these ships on their tail. "There's an asteroid field up ahead," Jake said finally, his mind working quickly. "We can use it to hide. If we get in there, the radar won't be able to pick us up as easily. It's our best shot." Lissa nodded, her expression tight with fear. "Do it." Jake pulled back on the controls, aiming the ship toward the asteroid field that loomed in the distance. The large rocks, floating aimlessly in space, created a dangerous maze, but it was their only hope. The ships behind them were closing in fast. Jake's heart raced as he maneuvered the Iron Wolf into the asteroid field. The ship jerked and twisted as he dodged huge chunks of rock, narrowly avoiding collisions. Lissa's breath came in short, terrified bursts as she watched the asteroids fly past them at terrifying speeds. For a few moments, it seemed like they might have lost their pursuers. The asteroid field was dense, and the ships following them had to slow down to avoid crashing. But Jake knew better than to relax. Then came the worst sound he could have imagined: blaster fire. A loud bang echoed through the ship as one of the pursuing ships fired a laser blast. The blast missed, but it was close. Too close. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, throwing the ship into another roll to avoid another shot. He gritted his teeth, focusing on getting through the asteroid field and finding a way out. Lissa's voice shook. "What if we don't make it?" Jake didn't answer. He couldn't afford to think like that. He needed to keep them moving, stay one step ahead. The chase was on, and it wasn't going to stop until either they made it to Draconis Station or Derek caught up with them. Jake was starting to feel the weight of their situation. The chase had been relentless, and as they neared Draconis Station, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The pursuit had been close, too close for comfort. The asteroid field had bought them some time, but they couldn't afford to stop now. Their plan was simple: get to the station, lay low, and try to lose Derek Velos once and for all. But there was something else that weighed on Jake's mind: the marriage. As strange as it was, he had agreed to marry Lissa. And it wasn't just some simple formality. They needed it to be real, something that would hold up against the laws of her people. That meant they had to make it official. The more Jake thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. They weren't just running from Derek. They were about to take part in an alien custom that neither of them truly understood. Lissa had been quiet for most of the journey, her eyes constantly scanning the stars outside the window, her thoughts clearly far away. She wasn't the confident woman who had bargained for his help anymore. In her place was someone more vulnerable, uncertain about what the future would hold. And in a way, Jake could relate. He wasn't sure what was coming either. Draconis Station finally came into view. A massive station surrounded by floating debris, abandoned ships, and the occasional pirate vessel. It was a place for people on the run, where the laws of the galaxy didn't apply, a haven for smugglers and outcasts. Jake set the ship down in a remote docking bay, making sure the landing was as smooth as possible. Once the ship was docked, they both stepped out into the dim, sterile corridor of the station. Lissa looked around, her eyes scanning the place nervously. It was unlike anything she had seen before. This was no friendly place. It was a haven for criminals, people who lived in the shadows. "We need to find somewhere safe," Jake said, glancing around. He didn't like how quiet it was, how empty the station seemed. It was too easy to get lost in places like this. "I know a place where we can hide for a bit, but we have to move fast." Lissa nodded, still uneasy. "What about the marriage? Do we just find a priest or something?" Jake hesitated. He didn't know how this worked. What did it even mean to marry someone in her culture? He had agreed to it because it was their only chance at survival, but that didn't make it any less confusing. "We'll figure it out. We just need someone who can help us make it official." They walked quickly, weaving through the maze of corridors. They passed several shady figures, their eyes watching them suspiciously as they moved past. There were no friendly faces here. People kept their heads down and avoided eye contact. Jake felt the tension in the air. He had been in enough dangerous places to know when things didn't feel right. After a few turns, they reached a door marked with a faded sign. Bishop Arosh, efficient for all occasions. "Well, this looks promising," Jake said, giving Lissa a quick glance before pushing open the door. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with piles of paperwork stacked high and various alien artifacts scattered around the shelves. Behind a desk sat an older man with a grizzled face, his skin a pale green that seemed to glow faintly in the dark room. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, though there was a certain warmth to it that made him seem approachable. "We need to get married," Jake said bluntly. There was no point in sugarcoating it. They had no time to waste. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the request. "Married? You too? Here." He studied them both for a moment, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. "You sure about this? You understand this isn't some simple ceremony, right?" Lissa stepped forward, her voice steadied despite her nervousness. "Yes, we understand. It needs to be real. We need the legal marriage for my protection." The man nodded slowly, his face softening with understanding. "I see. Well, if it's real you want, then I can help. But it'll cost you." Jake didn't hesitate. "How much?" 1,000 credits. I'll need to prepare the papers, and you'll need to make sure it's done properly. There's no going back once it's official." Jake turned to Lissa, his mind racing. They had enough credits, barely, but this was one more thing that tied them to the station. It made them more vulnerable, more exposed. But there was no turning back now. "Do it," Jake said, turning back to the officiant. "We don't have time to waste." Bishop Arosh nodded, standing up from his desk and motioning for them to come closer. He began pulling out a series of papers from a drawer, his hands moving deftly as he prepared everything for the ceremony. It was strange, like watching a marriage unfold under the most unusual of circumstances. Jake wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but he had to trust that this was the only way to keep Lissa safe. Lissa stood next to him, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't meeting his gaze, her eyes focused on the papers Arosh was laying out in front of them. She was silent, lost in her thoughts, and Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. He wasn't even sure what it meant to marry her in her culture. Was this just a legal formality, or was it something deeper, something they both had to commit to emotionally? Arosh cleared his throat, breaking Jake's thoughts. "All right. The marriage will be simple. You'll exchange vows, sign the papers, and I'll officially register it. You two will be bound by the laws of the galaxy from this point forward. No one can undo it unless you both agree." Jake glanced at Lissa, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but looking at her, at the fear in her eyes, he knew this was the right thing to do. This wasn't about love or romance. It was about survival. It was about giving her a chance to live without the threat of being controlled by Derek. "Are you ready?" Bishop Arosh asked. Jake nodded, his throat dry. "Let's get this over with." Lissa hesitated, but then she nodded as well. "Yes." Arosh smiled, though there was a certain sadness in his eyes. "All right, let's begin." He spoke a few words in a language Jake didn't understand, and then turned to them. "Do you, Jake of Earth, take Lissa of Zephyret to be your lawfully wedded wife, to protect her, cherish her, and honor her for as long as you both shall live?" Jake didn't have to think about it. He knew what this meant for Lissa. He wasn't marrying her for love, but he was marrying her for her safety. And that was enough. He nodded firmly. "I do." Arosh turned to Lissa. "And do you, Lissa of Zephyra, take Jake of Earth to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor, trust, and rely on him for as long as you both shall live?" Lissa's eyes filled with emotion as she looked up at Jake. "I do," she whispered, her voice steady but soft. The officiant nodded and, with a small smile, handed them the marriage certificate. It is done. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. He didn't know what to say or how to feel. He had just married an alien woman he barely knew, in a strange place, under the most unusual circumstances. The weight of it didn't quite hit him at first, but as he looked at Lissa, something shifted in him. This wasn't just a contract. This was their bond, and no matter how strange it was, it meant something. Lissa looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what this means to me." Jake didn't know what to say. He had no idea what this meant for either of them. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. They were in this together now. "I didn't do it for you to thank me," Jake replied gruffly, trying to hide the emotion creeping into his voice. "I did it because you needed me, and I'm not leaving you to face Derek alone." Lissa smiled, her face full of gratitude, and something else, something like hope. It was the first time since their journey began that Jake felt like they might have a chance at surviving this. As they left Bishop Baroche's small office, Jake realized that the hard part was only just beginning. They had a marriage now, and with it, a new bond. But it wouldn't stop Derek from chasing them. The real challenge would be keeping Lissa safe, keeping them both alive in a galaxy full of danger. And the question that hung in the air, unspoken between them, was whether this marriage could ever become something more than just a survival tactic. But for now, it didn't matter. They had the weight of the marriage hung heavy on Jake's mind as he and Lissa moved deeper into the heart of Draconis Station. They were officially married now, but it didn't feel like a victory. In fact, Jake felt more confused than ever. What had started as a simple promise to help someone had turned into something far more complicated. As they walked through the dimly lit corridors of the station, the sounds of distant voices and the hum of machinery filled the air. Draconis Station was a place where people hid from the law, a place where secrets were traded like currency. And here, in this strange corner of the galaxy, Jake was beginning to realize that he wasn't the only one carrying a secret. Lissa hadn't spoken much since the marriage. She seemed quieter now, her eyes distant, like she was lost in her own thoughts. It was clear she wasn't just worried about the danger they were in or the fact that Derek Velos was still hunting them. There was something else, something deeper, something she wasn't telling him. They reached a small room at the end of the corridor, a place that looked like a makeshift safe house. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they stepped inside. The room was small but comfortable, with a simple bed, a table, and a few chairs. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Lissa sank into one of the chairs, her shoulders tense as she folded her arms across her chest. Jake took a seat across from her, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally, Lissa spoke. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had known this moment was coming. She had been too quiet, too distant since their wedding. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever secret she was about to reveal, but he knew it was important. She had trusted him with so much already, and this, whatever it was, could change everything. "What is it?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lissa hesitated, biting her lip as if she were debating whether to say it. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and Jake could feel his own anxiety building. I didn't tell you everything about Derek Velos," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "There's more to him than just being a merchant, more than just a man trying to control my life." Jake frowned, confused. "What do you mean? What else is there?" Lissa took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. "Derek isn't just some criminal or a power-hungry man. He's a high-ranking member of the Zephyrin Council, the council that rules my people." Jake blinked in surprise. The Zephyrin Council. That changed everything. He had known Lissa was from a powerful alien species, but he didn't realize just how influential they were. If Derek was truly a part of the ruling council, then he had resources, connections, and influence far beyond anything Jake had imagined. This was no longer just a chase to escape a dangerous man. This was a battle against a system. But why would he want you? Jake asked, his voice low with confusion and concern. You're his enemy. Lissa's eyes flickered with pain. I'm not just his enemy, Jake. I'm his daughter. The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he couldn't process what she had just said. Lissa's daughter. But that didn't make sense. Lissa was young, far too young to be the daughter of someone like Derek Velos. She was strong, independent, and defiant. Everything he imagined someone like her would be. But this was different. I know this must be hard to understand. Lissa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But my mother, she was a high-ranking officer in the Zephyrin military. She died when I was young. But before she passed, she uncovered something that could bring down the entire council. Jake leaned forward, his mind racing. This was bigger than he had thought. What was it? What did your mother find? Lissa's eyes darkened, and for a moment, she looked almost haunted. She found evidence that the council was planning to manipulate the galaxy's resources for their own gain. They were using their power to control entire planets, to force other species into submission. She was going to expose them, but before she could, Derek had her killed. Jake's stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't just a family feud or a power struggle. This was about life and death on a galactic scale. And you. I was supposed to carry on her work, Lissa said, cutting him off. She left me everything, every piece of information, every plan. But when I found out what Derek was really planning, I knew I had to run. I couldn't let him get his hands on it, and I couldn't let him control me either. Jake took a deep breath, trying to take it all in. He had always known that Lissa was running from something, but he never imagined it was this big. She wasn't just running from a cruel merchant. She was running from the entire power structure of her people. I didn't want to tell you, Lissa continued, her voice trembling. I thought it would only make things worse, but I can't keep hiding it from you. You're involved now, and if Derek finds out about you, he'll come for you too. Jake stood up and walked over to the small window of their safe house, staring out at the dark, vast emptiness of space. His mind was spinning. He had agreed to help Lissa without fully understanding what that meant, but now he saw the full picture. Derek Velos wasn't just after her because she was a runaway or a thief. He was after something far more valuable, a secret that could change the fate of entire worlds. I didn't sign up for this, Lissa, Jake said, his voice rough. This is bigger than anything I've ever dealt with. This isn't just about surviving. This is about taking down an empire. Lissa nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I didn't ask for this either, Jake. But now, we don't have a choice. I can't do this alone. Jake turned back to her, his mind made up. He wasn't going to walk away. He had already put himself into this mess, and now there was no turning back. He had already made a promise to her, to protect her. And that promise had just grown far more complicated. I'm with you, Jake said, his voice firm. No matter what happens, we'll face this together. But we need a plan. We can't just keep running. Lissa gave him a grateful smile, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and sadness. Thank you, she whispered. Jake took a seat next to her, his mind working furiously. We need to find a way to get that information. If Derek wants it so badly, it's got to be important. We have to figure out what it is and how we can use it to take him down. Lissa looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know how we'll do it, but we have to try. The council is too powerful. If we can't stop them, no one will. For the first time since they had met, Jake felt a sense of determination growing inside him. This wasn't just about saving Lissa anymore. This was about standing up to a corrupt system, taking down the people who had been controlling the galaxy for far too long. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And that, Jake realized, was all they needed to take on whatever came next. The tension between Jake and Lissa had reached a breaking point. It wasn't just about running anymore. It wasn't just about surviving. Everything had escalated, and now they had something far bigger to deal with. Lissa's secret was out, and the danger that came with it was unlike anything they had ever faced before. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, his thoughts spinning. What he had once thought was just a simple mission to help an alien woman escape her past had turned into a war against a powerful force. Lissa's father, Derek Velos, wasn't just a dangerous man. He was a key player in a system of corruption that spanned galaxies. He was part of the Zephyrin Council, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The secret that Lissa carried. Jake had known they couldn't hide forever, but the reality of their situation was settling in now. Derek Velos wouldn't just give up. The Council wouldn't just let this go. Lissa wasn't just running from one man. She was running from a whole system. Lissa had been staring out the window for a while, her eyes focused on the stars. Her expression was unreadable. It had been like this for days, her emotions hidden behind a mask of control. But Jake could see the cracks in that mask. The weight of what they were facing was wearing her down. Finally, Lissa turned to him. "We can't keep running, Jake," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a sadness that Jake hadn't heard before. "It's time we face them." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lissa continued, her gaze intense, "we can't keep hiding in places like this, hoping that Derek will just forget about us. He's too powerful. The Zephyrin Council controls so much, Jake. We can't outrun them forever." Jake's mind raced. What Lissa was saying was true. They couldn't keep running. But what did facing them mean? Did that mean fighting? And if they fought, how could they stand a chance against a system that had so much power? "We have to get the information," Lissa said, reading Jake's thoughts. "We have to find what my mother left behind. If we can expose the Council, if we can show the galaxy what they've been doing, maybe we can stop them. Maybe we can bring them down." Jake stood up and paced the room. "And how do we even start? Where do we find this information? Do you even know where it is?" Lissa's eyes darkened, and for the first time, she looked truly vulnerable. "I don't know where it is. But I know who might. There's a safe house on the planet Sephara, where my mother used to go. She kept important things there. It's hidden, and I'm the only one who knows where it is." Sephara. The name alone filled Jake with unease. It was the heart of the Zephyrin Empire, and it was where Derek Velos would have the most influence. If they went there, they would be walking into the lion's den. But what choice did they have? "We go to Sephara," Jake said, his voice resolute. "But we need to plan. Derek won't just let us walk in there and get what we need. If he knows we're coming, he'll be ready." Lissa nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I know, but we don't have a choice. We have to take this risk." Jake ran a hand through his hair, thinking through their options. They needed a way to get to Sephara without being detected, and they needed allies, people who could help them get past the Empire's defenses. "I have a contact," Jake said after a pause. "A smuggler. He owes me a favor. He can get us to Sephara, but it won't be easy. We'll need to move fast, and we'll need to keep a low profile. If anyone catches wind of what we're doing, it's over." Lissa's eyes brightened slightly, but she didn't smile. "When do we leave?" "Soon," Jake replied. "We need to make sure everything is ready. We'll gather supplies and then head to the smuggler's ship. We won't have much time to prepare, but it's better than doing nothing." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Jake and Lissa packed what little they had left, keeping their supplies light but practical. There was no time to waste. If they were going to make it to Sephara, they had to leave before Derek's forces could catch up to them. As they made their way through the dark, narrow corridors of Draconis Station, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. They were walking into the unknown, and the risks were higher than ever. If they failed, it would mean more than just their deaths. It would mean the fall of everything Lissa's mother had worked for. The smuggler's ship was docked at a remote bay, tucked away from the main traffic of the station. It was a small, unassuming vessel, but Jake knew it was fast. And that was all they needed. As they approached the ship, Jake spotted the smuggler waiting for them. He was a tall man, his face covered by a hood, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. "You're late," the smuggler said, his voice low and gravelly. "You sure about this?" Jake nodded. "We're sure. We need to get to Zephyra, and we need to move fast." The smuggler studied them for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, but you better hope your plan works. Zephyra isn't a place you can just waltz into, especially with a couple of fugitives." "We're not planning to waltz in," Jake replied. "We're planning to sneak in and get what we need before anyone notices." Lissa stepped forward, her voice steady. "We don't have time to waste. The sooner we leave, the better." The smuggler raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. He turned and gestured for them to board the ship. As the ship lifted off from Turkana Station and began its journey toward Zephyra, Jake felt the weight of the mission settle heavily on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. They were committed, and failure wasn't an option. They had to succeed. The trip to Zephyra was uneventful, but the closer they got to the planet, the more Jake could feel the tension building. Zephyra was a place of power, and Derek Vella's reach extended far beyond the Council. It was dangerous, but it was also their only hope. When they finally arrived in orbit around Zephyra, Jake and Lissa exchanged a look. This was it. The time had come. "Ready?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but determined. Lissa nodded, her expression resolute. "Let's do this." They descended into the planet's atmosphere, the ship shaking slightly as they passed through the layers of clouds. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had led them here. Jake knew that what happened next would change everything. The reckoning was coming, and they would either be part of it or they would be crushed by it.